Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this, welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that is hopefully for somebody. My name is Kyle Naranya, and on episode 150, there will be not one, but two feature film reviews. The first will be of Pixar's latest film, Elio, and the second will be of Danny Boyle's return to his not-so-zombie franchise 28 years later. There will be a non-spoiler section for both reviews, as well as a spoiler-filled section, so if you haven't had a chance to see either film yet, there's no need to worry. And then to round out the end of the episode, I will be responding to listeners' mail, as well as answers to last week's question of the week. Let's jump into Pixar's Elio non-spoiler thoughts.
Elio, skipping school! I don't know if this is boundary testing or sleep regression or... Which one of these is you?
I don't know, but I think that one is you.
I'm really glad I get another opportunity to talk about a Pixar film on the podcast. Since the run of it, I've only really been able to talk about Elemental and Inside Out 2, which is particularly interesting because there has been this large conversation around the idea that Pixar is exclusively sequels. And I find it really interesting because a lot of the chatter around animated films or big franchise pictures is that there's nothing original. And what's really funny to me is Pixar's one of those studios that started with a substantial amount of originals because that's all that they had, and obviously they continue to make sequels. But the place they find themselves in now with going Bob Iger returning to become the CEO and Disney wanting to increase their capital gains and have a lot more cash to spend on other things because of COVID and whatnot. But a lot of people became trained that specifically Pixar films would release on Disney+. Onward was released March 6th of 2020, and then obviously the world changed. Soul, Luca, and Turning Red were given Disney Plus releases, and then Lightyear, which had an overall mixed reception, led to it being a box office failure. And Elemental, funnily enough, was one of those original films that word of mouth spread, and it wound up being successful. And it's one of my favorite films that they've made that's solely original and not a sequel. Of course, you heard my conversation, or maybe you didn't, about Inside Out 2. I highly recommend checking that out. I did include my kids in that review, and it was really fun to get to see their perspective on what the film was trying to say about mental health. Elio is a movie that was announced back in 2000, I always hate saying that, but 2022. So this is a movie that has long been brewing within Pixar, and you can go back and watch the initial teaser trailer to sort of see what things have changed. Domi Shi returns from Turning Red, and then Madeline Sharafian is directing this as well. She's been a story artist on Coco and Turning Red, and is part of the Pixar senior creative team with Inside Out. And I tweeted about this, so my general thoughts in just short, concise opinion was shared, which is, I think this is a good movie, and the studio that Pixar has established as the premier children/family entertainment studio is still to be held. While this may not be one of the best movies Pixar has made, I still think that the original perspective that they provide and taking general concepts and exploring them through fun, innovative ways while providing eye candy, not in terms of it being junk food, but just visually interesting storytelling with a moral center that has a perspective on a specific opinion or life message that are generally meant to enrich somebody, whether that be understanding your own emotions, the idea of what it means to be alive, that was more recently done in Soul, or your own personal identity in something like Turning Red and Elemental. Can you go against your own upbringing? And Elio is an interesting movie because it's maybe one of the broadest that Pixar has made, but unfortunately what might be its downfall in that is the movie is so grand, and it's doing a mirrored image story with two of our main characters that unfortunately, because there is so much happening within the film as a whole, we don't really get to explore definitively with one particular character. You can have ensemble films, looking at the Inside Outs as a good example, but joy and sadness are the main focus of both of those, and then the other emotions disgust, anger and fear, and then anxiety and whatnot in the second film are more of secondary characters, where Elio obviously is named after him, but the way that the film sets up his relationships, interestingly enough, and you're going to see this throughout the week, so I'll plug it here. I have done my tier list of every Pixar film, so that's 29 pictures. So make sure you're following on any of the social medias, because slowly throughout this week, I'm going to be rolling out my reviews in 3 parts. So make sure you don't want to miss that. But Elio has so much to do, and the focus on his character is very similar to almost the narrative setup we are used to with Disney animated films. Now, I don't want to give a lot of this away because I actually didn't watch the trailers for Elio. I was aware of this movie going in. I went and saw it for my screening, which was in 3D, which I appreciate. The movies that should be in 3D are animated features. They're designed within 3 dimensions, and it doesn't have to be extra, which is great. This is a bright, colorful movie, and it provides an opportunity with a character to explore an aspect of the Pixar universe that they've never done before. Most of Pixar films are substantially grounded because they take place on Earth or some form of it. Yes, I know people are going to be mentioning WALL-E and other things like that, but for the most part, there's a grounded realism to what's going on in how things function. Even with the Monsters University or Monsters, Inc. franchises, those are a parallel dimension, a monster's reflection of what their Earth would be. Obviously, we've got some superheroing as well in this universe. I liked Elio as a movie. The bar that Pixar has set with what is expected from them is similar to some other incredible studios that make their own films the way that they do, and there's a flavor to them, what you can expect, how you expect to feel, what you expect to learn or be retaught through the way that these writers, directors, and actors and everybody involved within the Pixar studio deliver these, I wouldn't even say morality messages, but these heartfelt messages about the meaning of life or what it means to be alive, which I guess those things go hand in hand. I don't know why I said that twice. We're in the middle of a heat advisory right now, so maybe that's why I said it twice. And Elio's focus on its main message is a good one, but the way in which that message is delivered, and because of how characters are in certain places, the establishment of those relationships and those bonds being at the center of it gets stretched out in order to have this grand adventure. There's a similar issue in something like Strange Worlds, which was actually a Disney movie, or Onward, to get more in the Pixar realm, where you can have a general idea of what the focus is going to be for the movie, but when it doesn't seem to be the main attention-grabbing story point that you need to go back to continually add check marks that we are moving this character forward, as opposed to grand moments to establish what's happening and then kind of forget about it. You can do that effectively the other way, but something like Onward, I think, distracts itself with more of the journey than focusing on the destination, which the irony, of course, is that it's supposed to be about the journey, not the destination. But when the movies are saying, but look, the destination isn't what you thought it would be, that mix-up and kind of meanderingness hurts Elio overall. I felt the biggest, not bloat, because the movie is not long, it's 98 minutes, it's an hour and a half, is that the middle of it where the characters are supposed to be challenged with whether there's a lie reveal or a change in perspective because of new friendships or new antagonists, that middle of the movie feels like we have to stretch this story along. We weren't necessarily sure where we were going to go, because that could come down to the fact that they weren't really sure who Elio was. If you go back and watch the very first trailer for this, you see when he's abducted, he is completely alone. In the newest version of that, that's not the case. The outsiderness of Elio, I think there was a toe in, toe out investment in how outside of the norm they wanted that character to be. And when watching the movie, of course, he has an obsessiveness with space and whatnot, and you're given reasons for why that is the case. But I find it particularly interesting now in 2025 when there are so many different subjects, genres, pop culture properties for people to be obsessed with. For this to be the thing he's obsessed with now is othering him from other people. Of course, his life circumstances are different given the relationship he has with his aunt, but to choose that to be the focus and have somebody not necessarily feel that they fit in because of something they're interested in, that's a weird balancing act, and I don't think the movie effectively manages to do that, which is unfortunate. I like the look of this. I had a good time. Comparing this to other studios' animated features is significantly better. I mean, DreamWorks, I wouldn't include Illumination in that sentence, unfortunately, but obviously the Spider-Verse films, the other studios that can, I'm not even going to mention Blue Sky, can do this effectively. Elio still stands as a really well-made kids film, but by the bar Pixar has set for themselves, and this is not just to compare them to their earlier movies. I think there's a lot of stuff that is absolutely incredible that Pixar has made, and there's some good stuff and really good stuff that Pixar has made, but those things are compared to films made within its own studio. So I liked Elio. I wish it was great and something I would absolutely sell to people, but I find it really funny that for a time when moviegoers are begging to see new and original things and don't want to see sequels, looking at the box office numbers domestically for this past weekend, How to Train Your Dragon, live action remake, won the box office. 28 years later came in second, and then Elio came in third with what I believe is the lowest domestic opening for a Pixar film ever, which is not something that I think the studio is looking forward to. And I really hope that because this did happen, that this pushes Pixar away from making new and original movies. We know we're getting Hoppers next year, Toy Story 5, Incredibles 3, and Coco. It seems like they're probably going to pad their release window and their release schedule with more sequels, which people are complaining they keep doing. Maybe go see the new and original stuff. So let's jump into spoilers, and I can really dive into what works about this movie and what doesn't.
Whoa! Oh. Hi! I knew aliens were looking for me! You saved my life! I promise I'll put my weight on this, spaceship? Is this a spaceship? Anyway, where should we start? Probe samples? I've got plenty!
So the first place to probably start off with, as I mentioned, is that Elio is a child of he's an orphan, 2 dead parents who lives with his Aunt Olga. And I mention that because it is a conventional Disney setup to have our main character lose a parent or both of their parents. And it was funny just to see this in Elio. I know people are probably thinking, well, Andy didn't have a dad, and sometimes this is the case with this, but more often than not, parents are alive in Pixar films. And one of the things he focuses on to sort of deal with what he feels is he's been left alone is going to an alien planet, being abducted. He doesn't feel he belongs. And I think that idea of othering is something that really fits within the world of puberty and growing up and being a teenager. And it's interesting that the movie chooses to have this as somebody who is a tween or younger, because more often than not, especially with the internet, this is probably a feeling that kids are really having. And I commend the movie for doing that. But as I said, the focus on that idea of feeling you are an outsider and that you don't fit in really would have worked better if the movie's focus on this maybe wasn't as objectively obvious as the ideas that are usually at the center of other Pixar movies. Elio, after being abducted, meets another alien who is also dealing with these exact things, Glorden, and he's somebody who is the son of an alien race. They're these squishy worms who are in these battle suits as defense and warlords and want to be included in this like alien covenant of peaceful intellects. It's technology we've shared. It's a union of the universe. I think they call it a conclave. No, the communiverse. And Elio's been abducted because he's somebody who sends out a signal. And the setup for this is fun and it's interesting, and it's really cool to see Pixar do something that really pushes the boundaries of what has typically been almost imaginative within the world they live in. It's what if cars are alive? What if toys are alive? The feelings of emotions within yourself have personality, and then looking at specifically different otherworldly elements. Like WALL-E, the humans were the side story more so than it being the focus on what if aliens had emotions and feelings. And I think that stuff really works for the most part throughout all of the different movies they've made. But Elio makes it, you're on planet Earth and a child gets abducted. What does that mean? How does that affect the world around you? Elio's aunt, voiced by Zoe Saldana, doesn't really believe in this stuff, but of course is forced with the reality that this is probably happening because of what she goes through in the movie as a whole. And Glorden and Elio are fun, and I mentioned this in non-spoilers, which is their adventure within the communiverse and prior to that escaping off of the ship is cool, but I feel like the hijinks that they go on together doesn't really help sell the idea that the place you belong is the place where you feel like home, which, whether that's effectively communicated or not, is very subjective. And the idea of the social isolation that Elio feels, not being able to connect with his aunt, her not being able to connect with him as well. And we get to see what that means when Elio is quote unquote more normal, when they replace Elio with a clone, so that way Olga is unaware that he's gone. And I like that concept, and she immediately is aware things are different because he is acting quote unquote more normal. But what I really wish the movie tried to sell more so than feeling you have a home regardless, not even regardless, but you have somewhere to belong, even if you don't think it is the place you should be, which is kind of weird, but that everybody is a little abnormal. People have things they are obsessed about, big fans of, more so than this idea that, oh, we didn't appreciate each other when we had each other. I think the mix of that and the meanderingness of the middle portion of the movie, which is more just fun hijinks and how do we get back to back from Earth to the communiverse to save it because Lord Grygon, I believe is his name, or Grydon, wants to take over. The conventions of this feel much more predictable than we typically get in a regular Pixar film. And that's something that is a little disappointing and not something you would typically expect from this studio, which to me is why it winds up being kind of just in the middle. It's not something that is completely missing the mark. It's a movie that is visually fun and emotional because you still have compelling animation with really well executed voice actors. And I think these directors maybe didn't necessarily have a perfect conception of what they wanted the movie to be, which is why it sort of was in the minutia of production hell for quite a while. And you can sort of feel that with the movie in its final form. Is it worth checking out? I definitely would recommend it. It's certainly a better children's film than some of the other stuff that I don't think respects children's attention. That's always a movie that I'm looking for when I want to show movies to my kids. Now, that's not to say I'm not going to show them the other stuff, but they're the best example of movies that respect and give kudos to what kids are aware of, how much they can handle with mature concepts. Pixar's a studio that has proven kids are more capable of absorbing information than you give them credit, as opposed to constant attention-seeking, in-your-face, look at this, look at this, look at that. We have to stimulate you with all these different things because we don't have anything interesting to say. So Elio is definitely more than those films, but with the bar, as I've said, that Pixar has set for themselves, it doesn't meet those expectations, which is not to say it's disappointing, but you're grading it on what is already an incredible curve. So that's my review with spoilers For Elio, now let's jump into non-spoiler thoughts on 28 years later.
Do you know the words memento mori? It means remember death.
First, I want to address the elephant in the room, which is, Kyle, you don't see horror movies. You're probably mostly right, but if you thought I was going to miss a Danny Boyle movie, listener, you don't know me very well. And on top of that, an Alex Garland script for a 28 amount of times later. Yes, I've seen Warfare. I couldn't fit it into the podcast schedule. I'm sorry. But I did see, obviously, 28 years later. And what's really cool about this setup of this franchise is what works so effectively with the previous two, obviously, in most opinions, and mine as well, 28 Days Later was such an interesting pitch for that concept at the time. And a lot of people could assume by the marketing for this, potentially, that this was going to be a very derivative of other explorations of post-apocalyptic horror. And as somebody who loves The Last of Us and other versions of films that have shared this idea, Alex Garland and Danny Boyle continue to show they knew exactly what they wanted to do with this idea. And I'm so happy that they did. We already know we are going to be getting a sequel 28 years later, The Bone Temple, from Nia DaCosta, who blew me out of the water with her version of Candyman. And the fact that we're already getting more makes me very excited, because 28 Days and Weeks are almost anthology films within this shared IP. And what's so great about that is that you don't necessarily need to have seen any of those for this to work for you. The movie does a great job of establishing exactly what happened, because this is a franchise 23 years old at this point, and assuming that audiences know exactly what would have happened prior is not necessarily a safe assumption. This is not called 28 years later, 28 days times whatever. It is the continuation of this franchise, but allowing significantly new eyes to go into it. And I really appreciate that, because Danny's been pretty public that moving forward, there's going to be more significant connections to specifically 28 Days Later. And I would be very curious if we do somehow weave in the Weeks Later cast as well. But 28 years later is so awesome because, for one, it is a fresh exploration of this idea. And for this movie to be made now, it's interesting because there was a movie I saw a trailer for that really focused on what was going on during COVID, which my friend and I said to each other, it was Chris, I don't know why I'm not saying, that we weren't really ready for that yet. Obviously, COVID, the end of it, arguably, was 3 years ago, but 5 years from the dawn of it, at least here in North America, that this idea for a virus contagion spreading and the aftermath of that on such an extreme scale, and looking at the reflections of humanity, what it would mean to be dealing with that in your everyday life for nearly 30 years, makes it such a fresh perspective as opposed to a month or half a year later. It makes it intrinsically a whole different world. This idea of what you would be living through, how you would be managing that stress, your day-to-day life, what it means to know that with one person, this whole thing could go down, and the relationships that almost not devolve, but become substantially more primal and almost older in sentiment in how to maintain civilization is really compelling. And this movie, which markets itself as a horror, as somebody who is a self-declared scaredy cat, I have to say there was really only one sequence that I was not enjoying for the horror elements. The movie really does balance those tones so effectively. Danny Boyle's managing of on the edge of your seat, tension and fear is incredible. But knowing the subtleties of letting the audience relax and injecting those moments of humor and affable nature with the back and forth between characters, giving us those intrinsically connective human moments matter. So that way, if people are to die, you care about their loss. Because if you don't allow that to happen in the movie, it just winds up being a bunch of people die and you don't care. But also, as opposed to a lot of horror schlock, and I know there's great horror movies, I reviewed one with Sinners this year, that if the movie's got something to say and a journey for us to go on with that character, that makes us immediately more invested in their destination. I know that seeing the connections as I'm reviewing 28 years later to Elio, I'm finding hilarious. But the movie focusing itself on the familial relationship with Jodie Comer, Alfie Williams, and Ellen Taylor-Johnson. And Alfie Williams, who is, I would argue, the lead of the movie, is absolutely incredible as Spike. And to have great actors who want to work on these properties, whether, and I mean, I did just name them: Jodie Comer, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Ralph Fiennes, just to name, I would say, the main cast of the film. And to see the subtleties with each of those performances and the way that these relationships feel so real. And one of the aspects that I think wholeheartedly makes this so much more interesting than a lot of other ways that horror movies have been made in the 21st century is the idea that they used iPhones for this. And Aaron Taylor-Johnson has talked about that when you're making something that intimate with a cell phone, the perspective and the way that people immediately feel like it is almost an invasion in the privacy and the adjustment that needs to be taken, because when you're typically making a film, you have setups. You have to set up the lighting. You have to set up these large cameras, whoever they may be made by. When you're doing that with a cell phone, the setup takes minimal time. It allows the cinematography for this, with Anthony Dodd Mantle, who worked on this movie, to give such a specific and unique and unlike anything we've really seen before in this genre. The use of depth perception, wide angles, just being able to get so close to those actors to really have us feel as if we are in this adventure and post-apocalyptic world with them, makes everything have such a tangible nature that makes the relatability much more accessible and feel as if we are in this world. This is not a set we're living in. We get to go to real locations. There are maybe sets for this when they go inside of buildings, but having rich landscapes establish what this world is like nearly 30 years after the release of the Rage virus and how people are dealing with the consequences of those PETA activists nearly 30 years ago makes this movie worthy of adding to the pantheon of 28 timelines later films. And I immediately wanted to know where we were going to go. This movie is so integral in continuing this franchise, feeling as if, as opposed to a trilogy, which is especially interesting because this is the third film, but seeing this as an opportunity that the world has evolved since the days when they made these prior to an actual pandemic, that our perspective on what that means for the social relationships of people as well as our international relationships and what that would mean if you have contained this to a specific area, this being the UK of Europe, and continuing to show how that has evolved, similar to one of my favorite franchises, the modern Planet of the Apes universe. And where the movie concludes, I'm so excited to see where we are going to go. We know we're going to get a second, and man, I hope we get a third. If you are a fan just of great storytelling that happens to have a horror aspect to it, as a self-proclaimed scaredy cat, this is absolutely worth your time. You need to check it out. And Danny Boyle has continued to prove that when him and Alex Garland have an idea, it's worth sharing with the world. You need to check out 28 years later. Let's jump into spoilers, and I can give you all the nitty-gritty details.
There were so many dead. infected and non-infected alike.
One of the most interesting places that the movie starts that I guess I'd thought about subconsciously, but I hadn't consciously, is that when you push the timeline so far away from the inciting event, we now have almost 2 generations of people who don't know what the real world is like. And that is why this perspective needs to happen now. If you just keep having people that lived in the normal world, the movie just falls into that similar ground of, we've seen this before. We're trying to get back to what was before the normal times, where nearly 30 years later, this is the new normal. People grow up with this expectation, knowing exactly what their lot in life is being, and societies have developed to survive these circumstances. We're not looking for a cure like we were in 28 Weeks Later. We are civilizations, and we focus on one in particular. And what I like about the movie's setup in the beginning is giving us a reminder of where we were during the initial event of 2002, but jumping ahead and giving us this community in Scotland. I believe it's in Scotland. I should probably look that up. Where is this in the UK? I don't know what those words mean. It is an island outside of the UK, also called Holy Island. So that's where it is. And this idea that you can set up a community there because of the tide and this rather, I'm not sure if it's man-made or natural occurring. My guess would be it probably is man-made bridge that allows them to go off of the island for resources. And the start of the movie is all about Aaron Taylor Johnson taking his son Spike for his first visit of the mainland, and Spike being the focus of this movie. And what is so integral to this movie working is the pivot of Aaron Taylor Johnson being this husband of a wife who's dealing with some sort of illness. That's Jodie Comer, who is absolutely amazing and delivers another career-defining performance, which isn't surprising anymore. She's brilliant. But the back and forth nature we have with Alfie, him being somebody who wants to prove to his dad that he's capable of these things because he's been preparing for them, and that their experience on or off of their island doesn't necessarily go as they've planned because they run into an alpha, and the idea with these other rage-infilled people that they're evolving to some state where we have alphas now who are substantially harder to take down because the rage virus has mutated, and the experience that they have leads them to barely making it back and having to be saved by the people around them. And it's during that celebration we learn with Spike's return that his father isn't the guy he suspected he would be. He's having an affair with another woman, and he sees him entirely differently and is given this information about somebody who potentially could help her living off of the island, who is Ray Fiennes' Dr. Ian Kelson. In this idea that, well, there's a doctor. These concepts are general in these people's minds because they have not lived in quote-unquote modern society and for so long, and him being an idealistic kid and thinking, well, if I just take my sick mom to this person because my dad has given up on her, she'll be okay and we'll be able to move on. And that blind optimism of youth that is slowly broken and disillusioned and wears away from Spike as he experiences the world with his mom and spending time with Ian Kelson. And one of my concerns going into the movie was that Ray Fiennes' character, and we see this in the trailers, there's all these skeletal poles and skull towers, that this was going to be in that cultish, crazy person vibe. Something went wrong. I mean, he's clearly not completely sane, but he's approaching the world still with that humanity he had prior and seeing that within everything around him. He's somebody who doesn't kill the infected. He just drugs them so that way he can still manage to live his everyday life. And that anybody who has lost their life because of this, that he adds that to the monument of what once was. and it's through the back and forth with Spike. Spike gets an entirely new perspective, as well as his experience with a completely abandoned Swedish NATO soldier in Eric. And with Eric's introduction into the movies, specifically right at the midpoint, it allows for levity, which I said in on spoilers. When you don't have those opportunities where the viewer can relax, if you're tense the whole time, you just wind up hurting yourself. And any surprises no longer become impactful. You need those moments to decompress to make the next thing scary. And some people might say, well, yeah, that's an obvious convention of horror. I don't necessarily disagree with that idea, but you still have to do it properly. And Danny Boyle and Alex Garland do that with giving us a child as the sleeper main focus of the movie, who's experiencing this world as the new normal for him, where he hasn't lived in civilized society to the degree of the early 2000s, that he no longer feels necessary to be a part of that world after his mom gives up her own life and euthanizes herself, so that way Spike no longer has to deal with it, and that the baby they find, who is delivered from an infected, who may or may not be infected. The movie leads us to believe she is not infected, but we will maybe see that in the sequel. Maybe things go awry and that village is destroyed. Who knows? But she is left back at the village. Spike goes all the way back to deliver the baby, but no longer wants to be a part of that community anymore. He wants to live on his own because he no longer feels the need to return to his father. That relationship is broken and has been severed by his father's infidelity, to move on. And this being a story of a coming to age element was not something I suspected. I did expect it to be a father and son duo story, and the successful pivot to it being about a son's relationship with both parents and moving into that area of independence was a masterstroke. I absolutely loved this movie. I mentioned the cinematography. I think the intimate details that you're allowed to do and making this so this does not look like any other movie make this an absolute must-see. I'm really looking forward on where we go in the sequel, because we get a 28 days later after Spike has delivered the baby and living on his own, and we see Jimmy, who was the child who was experiencing the inciting incident of 2002 in the very beginning, to establish what this universe has been like. And he's played by Jack O'Connell, who, interestingly enough, was in Sinners, which I already reviewed this year. So I'm super excited for 28 years later, The Bone Temple, which comes out less than a year from now, which is really exciting. I hope this movie continually gets seen by other people in theaters, because it is absolutely worth your time. If you're somebody who wants to go and see it late night, I think you'll enjoy it then. Me being the big scaredy cat, I saw this at 12:30 in the afternoon. So when I left, it was daytime, which I was super grateful for. But Danny Boyle continues to prove he is a master storyteller, and Alex Garland writes narratives that Danny adapts incredibly well. You need to check out 28 Years Later. Now, let's jump into question of the week responses and listener mail.
Can I ask you a question? Just fun?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
Last week's question of the week was, what is your favorite franchise that focuses on zombies? Scotty Cameron wrote on YouTube, so I could have left it at Let There Be Dragons 2, but because I love some war dramas too, that film is one of the few films I can think about the Spanish War and rise of fascism in Spain. So it's very interesting, the film of World War II era. Yes, I do love the Hannibal franchise too, so as long as we can ignore the existence of Hannibal Rising, Lord of the Rings is my favorite fantasy franchise. Okay, interesting. Isla writes in first time, says the Disney Zombies movies series. You know, I've never watched any of those, which I don't think surprises anybody. Sparago Castano says, I Am Legend is my pick, or alternatively, Zombieland. Okay. Who cares? 26475 says, I was waiting for 28 months later all this time. I'm sorry for you. You didn't get it. Sinkers Short Clips says The Walking Dead comics. All right. James Duffy 965 says Evil Dead. Pig Taku 4276 says, High School of the Dead. It's sad the creator died, so it will never be finished. Oh, interesting. I'm going to have to look that up. Follower H9Q says Walking Dead the show. And then Scotty Cameron wrote, not much of a zombie apocalypse guy. I might have to go with the Of Dead franchise or The Walking Dead because I do like me some Robert Kirkman. Granted, when it comes to Robert Kirkman titles, I prefer Oblivion Song, Void Rivals, and Invincible over Walking Dead. Scotty, this won't surprise you. I've never heard of those other things besides Invincible. I do like the Walking Dead comic, though, and I wish the show actually followed the comic more, like Frank Darabont wanted to the point where we see a post-apocalyptic zombie apocalypse. I blame Glenn Mazzara for that. The Romero series is just iconic as well. And then Dylan Pollock wrote in, I'm going to go with the George Romero Dead movies, Night, Dawn, and Day. Day of the Dead is underrated. Thank you to everybody who submitted their answers for Question of the Week. Next week's question is going to be related to Formula One, which is what the review of episode 151 is going to be. I'm really curious. We've got a Top Gun movie with fighter jets, Top Gun Maverick, that really put us in the cockpit with a pilot. And now we're getting that in Formula One. So my question is, what sport do you think deserves the top, what sports movie deserves the Top Gun Maverick treatment? What sport needs an iconic film to reestablish how exciting that sport actually is? So to let me know, you can comment below directly on Spotify and YouTube. You can email the filmreelistspod@gmail.com, or you can answer the Question of the Week short. Usually goes live on Thursdays or Fridays. It's on every social media platform, so make sure you're following the Film Realist there to let me know what your answers are. A lot of the answers we got this week were on YouTube Shorts, so thank you everybody there. And, believe it or not, we have a new review on Apple Podcasts. The title of the review is That's a Lot of Movie from Dry Tan 27. Kyle reviews all the blockbusters, and while I don't see them all, it's fun to hear him review everything so passionately. Thank you so much, Dan, for that. If you haven't yet, please give the podcast a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform, and make sure to follow, because I can announce there will be a special bonus episode Tuesday evening. I can't tell you the exact time yet because I don't have it handy. I want to say it is 10:30 p.m. Let me check that embargo and I can let you know. Yes. 9:30 p.m. So at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, June 24th, there will be a bonus episode of the podcast that will be a non-spoiler review of an upcoming streaming show. Follow your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss that. You're going to want to hear what I have to say about it because the opinion may surprise you. As already stated, next week's episode of the show is going to be Formula One. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I will see you next time!